Omar, hi. Good to have you with us. How have you been?
I've been good, Ashu. Good to be here, and I look forward to talking to you today.
Omar, this has been a session long in the making, right? We've been trying to do this for some time now.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
I'm particularly excited about this interaction, right? Because the world is becoming smarter, right? I think our equipments, in a way, are becoming smarter, but I think there's a long, long way to go, right? I think the other when you talk of, say, the white goods industry, right? Something which is very close to what you're doing, right? And improving it, right? I think what has also become important is conversation of sustainability, right? I think people are becoming a lot more responsible, especially what has happened after the 2.5 years that we've kind of experienced, right? And I think which is great, right? I think we always wanted a responsible society, and I think here we are, and it's going to get better for that, right? And I think that makes this conversation very interesting at many levels, right? Because one of the largest industry, which is white, right, has continued to play in a certain common way, right? You're helping them improve across their entire range of products, becoming more smarter, becoming more intuitive in the process, right? Something that I'll let you talk about as we go along, right? But before we do that, I'd love you to give us a quick round of introduction to many things that you've done, so that we know the person in the frame, and from there on we talk about virtual forest, right, and all the good things that you're doing in changing the dynamics of this incredible space, which is only going to grow from here on, right? So I'd love to start this with a quick round.
Thank you, Ashu. It's great to be here, and thank you for for the attention that you're giving us today. So I am the CEO of Virtual Forest, the founder CEO. Started this company in November 2019. But working, but I have to say the technology that we work on and the overall idea and strategy behind this company was something that was cooking along before that. And prior to starting Virtual Forest, I was already in the electronics domain. I headed a company that manufactured film capacitors, components that went into various white goods and other applications. But as much as I tried to, again, I was a part of the founding team in that company as well. And as much as we tried to, change direction and start doing what we're doing today, it just wasn't possible. So, which is why it made sense for me to exit that company. And prior to my previous company, Solid State Systems, I've done a variety of things. I'm a bit of a serial entrepreneur. I've worked in media, in computer vision. I've even worked in hospitality. I once owned a restaurant in India, and I was also an investor in a resort in Bali. So as you can imagine, I've had like a very, very wide sort of life experience when it comes to starting a company.
Right.
But this time around with Virtual Forest, it went beyond just just a company for company's sake, or whatever material benefits I was seeking. With Virtual Forest, Virtual Forest came into existence maybe like a year or two after I had my first child, and it really became apparent that that I wanted to do something meaningful to make sure that emissions are reduced, and we do something to make material difference to the world that our children are going to inherit. And it became clear that this is largely a technology problem, and so set up a technology company to address it, and that's where we are today.
Super. Omar, I'd love to understand a little about the construct of what you call it. And of course, I've done my reading, right, before getting into the conversation, right? But I think for the ease of many who are going to be watching it, right? I think typically when you think of Virtual Forest, right, like brand, I don't think you're thinking capacitors, right? I don't think you're kind of thinking electronics, right? I think possibly what you're thinking of is something to do with AR, VR, right? Something in the gaming space, right? So a very unique name in itself.
Maybe, yeah.
But yeah, I'd love you to give us a view into some of the very interesting things that you are doing at Virtual Forest.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, let me start off by just talking about the name.
Sure.
So Virtual Forest, the story behind the name is that just like how trees sequester carbon emissions from the atmosphere, the
Right.
technologies that we work on mitigate carbon emissions before they enter the atmosphere. And
Right.
so the more of our products that are out there in the market, it's like planting more trees and hence growing a virtual forest. So that's
Right.
that's what that's what the that's what the plan that's where the name comes from.
Right.
And when we started this company, we kind of signposted our you know the sort of landmarks that we wanted to reach in terms of the number of devices that we'd have out in the field. So
Sure.
say we had like 1 million devices out in the field, that
Right.
would be equivalent to a forest the size of a
Wow.
forest in India. So that's how we've set our benchmarks. And the larger the number of devices that we have, it's like we'd be mitigating as much CO2 as a forest of that size as
Amazing.
well. So
That's
that's how
deep.
we've set up. That's how, yeah, well, that's how we set our benchmarks.
Very interesting. Omar, I think I'd love, like I said, right, I'd love you to, kind of take us through. Uh, yes.
Yeah. So I'd like to just share a little
Sure.
slide about our company, and this really helps us explain, first of all, what we're about and what we're doing now and what we intend to do in the future.
Mhm.
So the one line that brings together the technology that we work on and the thesis behind our company is motor control solutions for the journey to net zero. So we specialize in motor control solutions, and while this might seem like a niche specialization, the reality is that motors are responsible for a very very large portion of the energy consumed in our daily lives.
Right.
In India, again, a less a country where appliance penetration is still very low. Even in India, 65% of residential energy use is from motors. So that could be ceiling fans, refrigerators, air conditioners, water pumps in some cases. And in the case of industrial applications, energy consumption from motors is extremely high as well, close to around 70%. So making motors more energy efficient is really possibly the key step that we can take starting today on a path to net zero. So our company, Virtual Forest, has decided to explore three technology pathways, and these pathways are widely accepted as the pathways that the world will have to take on its journey to net zero by 2050.
Sure.
The first pathway that we work on is energy efficiency. Again, these are all decarbonization pathways. The second pathway that we've started working on recently is electric mobility, and in the latter part of this decade, we hope to start doing work in carbon capture as well.
Okay.
So when we started Virtual Forest, the first application that we went after on the energy efficiency pathway was home appliances. Now there are a couple of reasons for this. Probably the key reason being that this was a segment that already had an existing market in India, and starting off a company working on I would say future technology is a difficult thing to do in India, in a country where investment towards long-term R&D is not very prevalent. So we had to choose a domain that meant that we could start generating revenue immediately, and so that's why we picked home appliances.
Sure.
The challenge with that, of course, is a mature market like home appliances has a huge amount of competition, and you're dealing with very very large scale manufacturing, usually centered out of China. So we'd have to do something extremely unique and innovative to try and compete.
Sure.
And so that's what we did. We started working in air conditioning to begin with, and we developed controllers suited to the Indian ecosystem. And now, since quarter 4 of last year, when we entered mass manufacturing, we're supplying some of the largest firms in India. The second segment we went after was BLDC ceiling fans. Now, this is an interesting use case. I mean, unlike other home appliances that have very very low penetration in the high single digit ratios, ceiling fans are almost ubiquitous in India. 97% of electrified homes in India have at least one ceiling fan.
Okay.
And a very interesting data point is that around 12% of 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 residential energy use is purely ceiling fan, and that translates to around 6% of India's total energy use is from ceiling fans in people's homes.
Mm-hmm.
And BLDC ceiling fans are a low investment route for India to reduce that energy consumption by half. BLDC ceiling fans typically consume 50% as much energy as a regular induction motor ceiling fan. And it's a pretty cheap thing to do. I mean, some estimates peg the cost of replacing ceiling fans across the country would be only as high as 40% of the cost it would take to generate that 3% of India's total energy consumption, which is how much you'd be able to save by this technology. So this is a revolution waiting to happen in India, and this year the Indian government, as a part of the standard and labeling scheme that we have, that's spearheaded by the organization, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency in India. The standard and labeling scheme is commonly called the star rating system in India. So that comes into effect for ceiling fans this year, and from next year onwards, all ceiling fans sold in India would have to be considerably more energy efficient, and this technology is going to really, enter its inflection point in the next year. So that's an area that we're already doing work. We're manufacturing large quantities and supplying to some of the large firms in India in that particular space as well. So we went after these kind of applications, specifically air conditioning and ceiling fan, to start off, really kickstart our business, to start generating revenues, and we've been successful in doing that and creating a sustainable business that in its second year is already PAT positive and growing at a really good rate. What's happened from there is that we've been able to shift into the next stage in our company's existence, which is a stage where we've been able to create a track record and now enjoying significant network effects within the home appliance ecosystem, but also in adjacent ecosystems, like agricultural, water pumping, and also to some extent EVs as well. So after looking at these two cooling applications, that's AC and ceiling fans, we've now got products in customer validation, which will enter production this year for washing machines, for kitchen appliances like mixer grinders. We have applications for agricultural pumping, and in development we also have applications for inverter refrigeration. So these are all technologies which are going to aid India's very, very large energy efficiency program, which is in effect. I mean, India has possibly the world's largest energy efficiency program in effect right now, and certainly the standards that Indian appliances need to meet in terms of energy efficiency are extremely stringent, and it's something that that industry is reacting well to and is able to meet. So that's what we're doing in the energy efficiency decarbonization pathway, and moving forward in the latter half of this decade, we hope to start doing a lot more work in industrial applications. We're starting to see very, very specific requirements to make certain processes more efficient in the industrial domain, and that's something that we're starting to do initial work on now, and we hope that becomes a big part of our energy efficiency journey moving forward.
Interesting.
The second pathway that we're doing work is electric mobility. I mean, this is the next big thing that's going to happen in India. If you consider two-wheelers and three-wheelers in India, we're already at a scenario where between 5 to 8% of all two-wheelers and three-wheelers sold in the country. I mean, if you sum the number of two-wheelers and three-wheelers, around 5 to 8% of vehicles sold in India are already electric vehicles. In the case of two-wheelers, it's around 5%. In the case of three-wheelers, it's actually closer to 20 to 25% of three-wheelers sold in India are already electric vehicles. This is for passenger as well as light logistics applications. So this is really a revolution, which is still, I would say, in its infancy in India, but it's certainly headed in the right direction. and that's an area where we're doing significant work as well. So currently we have a controller for two-wheeler electric vehicles, which is in customer validation with some of the large motor manufacturers in India. And moving forward in development, we have two very prestigious projects. One of which is to develop a controller for medium and light logistics applications, and this is for one of the large semiconductor manufacturers in the world.
Sure.
We'll be announcing this project in the near future. The second project that we are working on currently in the electric domain is the development of ASIL B rated controllers. These would be controllers that are designed to meet automotive safety standards globally, and these controllers are aimed at medium logistics applications to begin with in India, and will also then be extended into four-wheelers and also two-wheelers. So that's something that we're currently doing as well. And this project is also one where we have won a government grant to develop this particular product, and that's something that we'll be announcing in the near future as well. Moving past that, the next opportunity we believe, post the inroads we're making in two-wheelers and light logistics, is the electrification of farm equipment. Mm-hmm. Now that's an area which we're seeing is a focus area for the Indian government, and it's something that we expect is going to see a fair amount of interest and investment in the next few years. We're already starting to see projects for the electrification of tractors and certain specialist equipment like crop dusters and things like that, and we're doing work with some firms in that area. And as we move later into this decade, past midway, we hope to have a sufficient track record to start doing business in electrification of commercial vehicles, and eventually electrification of four-wheelers as well. So that's the pathway that we envisage for electric mobility.
We're gonna talk about some of that, Omar, in just a bit, right? I think the future is definitely very exciting.
Absolutely.
If you could just switch off the screen share.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's an interesting path, right? And I think a massive a challenge that you've possibly taken for yourself and for the team, right? But just a very interesting one. Now, what I want to talk a little about how this market is kind of playing out, right? While of course on one side you have the traditional players, right, who continue to struggle with making for, and that's largely because they've essentially been designed in a certain form, right, for a newer emerging market, right, which is sensitive, sensible, responsible, all of that, right. And then there is this emergence of newer world brands which are coming, right. We have a couple of them who essentially are consumer facing, that's one, and essentially offering a very similar stack, right? When you talk of ceiling fans, for example, right? I mean, there are companies like Atomberg which have come in, and they've done a phenomenal job, right? And they are kind of creating a space for themselves, right? When you talk about kitchen equipment, for example, right? There are a bunch of products that are happening on that front, right? Now, a lot of what you're doing essentially is now being bagged as an IP within these consumer-facing brands, right? These brands are also seeing a lot of excitement, traction, faith, trust, and participation of capital, right, across a lot of larger funds, right, who are kind of coming in, because while technology is important, right, I think what is also important in the process is your ability to upprice your product, right, with the kind of features that these guys are offering. There's this abnormal profit zone which also comes in handy to them, right? While what you were doing and the way you kind of playing it, which is empowering in a B2B sort of a setup, right? That upside is very limited, right? How do you see that? Because that's a very typical complexity that emerges for a player like yourself, right? Who's essentially focusing on a lot of IP. You're like an Intel Insight, right? But
absolutely,
for me as a brand, my profitability, I mean, is while of course I want to draw maximum, right, but I will have to squeeze you out in the process to sort of have that extra percentage points, right? Not necessarily a very savvy condition to be in, right? How do you see that? Is that something that just crossed your mind? And is there a temptation to cross over and becoming a brand yourself, right? Because you have the IP, and there are a couple of guys who are already solving for this, right? That essentially means from an investor standpoint also and other stakeholders, it's just so much more easier to kind of go out and have a solid convincing pitch on that front, right? What's your sense of it? How you see it?
Absolutely. I mean, look, D2C and B2B are essentially very, very different business models, and for whatever reason we are in the B2B business model, and I mean, it's certainly as I mean, everything you said there absolutely is the case, and it's something that's playing out on an everyday basis, as far as we're concerned. We're empowering brands, smaller new age D2C brands, and also the traditional larger trade focused brands who are trying to make headway in new technology areas. So we're supporting all of both types of brands. In terms of the temptation to go direct to consumer, there's a lot more attached to creating a brand than what we're doing immediately.
Sure.
The one major area that we are sort of trying to avoid is that we are trying to make sure that we don't tie ourselves down to a manufacturing operation. To be honest, that's something I've done my entire life, and at the time of creating this company, it was our objective to concentrate on IP creation, on R&D, and that being our business model. So what we've I would say that one of the core ideas that we have behind our business model is that we're trying to almost bring a software mindset to a hardware business, where we are dealing in IP, in information rather than actual physical products. So we essentially are looking at a scenario where, of course, this does not happen seamlessly in practice, but it's something we're moving towards. We're trying to move to a scenario where we are exclusively in a zero cost of goods sold situation, where we sell licenses only to manufacture our products. This, in my experience and our analysis up to this point, is potentially a much more higher EBIT model than actually getting into product manufacture at this stage, and requires a different kind of a setup, a different kind of a business model and infrastructure than going direct to consumer. Certainly, I mean, the news stories and the buzz around D2C brands, certainly in the last year and a half, have definitely turned our head a little bit. But we're trying to stick to this business model. I mean, yeah, I mean, or maybe better sense is prevailing. You have to know what you can do and can't do. So I don't know. I don't know which one's which, but right now our strategy is to create what is a unique business model in India, certainly, and I think in a lot of other markets that we're currently doing work in, specifically in Southeast Asia. This is a unique way to work. A lot of companies have had to pivot from trying to be IP providers to total product manufacturers, just to keep the lights on, I suppose. But we've somehow managed to create a business model which is doing very well on a pure play licensing. But having said that, we also do product sales where we buy finished products from our manufacturing partners and resell to customers. So we're still evolving that part, but the objective would be to not deal in atoms but to deal in bytes. So that's what we're trying to do.
Interesting. Omer, I have a very important, interesting question, right? On the way the industry is kind of shaping up, right? Now, but before I do that, one thing that I want to understand, right, is like I said, right, Intel inside in many ways, and I think that's the path that you very consciously chosen and take. Now, one problem that I have as a consumer, I'm on the outside, right? A large part of my buying is not necessarily, and while I say what I'm saying, there is an element of me which is conscious, right? My sense is because you're a B2B provider, eventually you'll be an arms supplier to pretty much everybody, right? What that means is that the tech, the tech inside, right, is essentially going to be like a common communication point, right, to engage the consumer. A large part of my interaction or my purchase decision is a function of how that product looks like, its functional utilization, right, and so many other factors, right. Now, you have a limited role to play. For example, with an IFB or with a Samsung, right? You're just kind of playing a very limited game, right? While the success of the brand is going to be dependent on how they, for example, design, right? How they're thinking about the consumer, right? Which could potentially turn out to be a great positive or a great negative, right? Depending on how the consumer kind of perceives it, or their communication line, right? Or their marketing and advertising methods, and so on and so forth, right? What's your sense of it, right? I mean, how happy or sad does it make you to see some of this, right? And brands can go terribly wrong on a lot of these aspects, right? Do you have a sense of dissatisfaction, if you can call it, when you see some of these improvements that could be brought in, right? Which is just so logical and intuitive, right? But you don't have a say. Do you think that's a limitation, something that cajoles you, focuses you, right? Or is there a model level intervention that you've done where you speak with these brands, right? The relationship that was not of say a component supplier, irrespective of whatever business model that you have, right? But that of a partner, which is now helping them think better design, helping them understand the consumer better, right? Is that the element to the relationship?
Absolutely, and it's a relationship which has been evolving as well from when we started. When we started being the new kids on the block, there was sort of there was a situation where companies were dictating in terms of what they had in mind. But very early on we found that, and I would say that possibly our most valuable offering to our customers is, beyond just of course the products we're supplying now, is a technology roadmap. I mean, a scenario like if you take large, specifically local brands that are operating in applications like like air conditioning and others, they're typically maybe a year or two behind in terms of feature set to the Korean and Japanese firms that they compete against in the Indian market and in Southeast Asia. So that technology roadmap is something that they were always lagging on. But now partnering with us means that we're able to, first of all, deliver iterations, bringing in new technologies very, very quick time. And the other point is we're able to help them plan for the future as well, not only in terms of being cost competitive, but also being in technology, as well as being more competitive in terms of features and benchmarking against their competition. So that's certainly a massive offering that we're able to provide our customers. And with the track record that we've managed to build now, the conversation's changing to a scenario where they do want to hear from us a lot more than just telling us that, okay, this is how it has to be. And it's an evolution, right? I mean, you only start thinking in those terms if there is a technology solution available to provide that to you. This wasn't the case with the customers earlier, and hence they weren't really being that forward thinking. But now that they see that it's possible for them to plan for the future and execute for the future, I would say more than plan for the future, these are conversations that we're starting to have. And in terms of the whole analogy that you use with Intel Inside and how we are as a brand, something that we've been quite conscious about from the get-go, and again, which is why we've one of the thoughts that we've tried to put in place, and still very much in its infancy as far as our customers are concerned, is sort of communication about the whole virtual forest concept, that this product is helping reduce emissions in this way, equal to one tree. You're growing a forest the size of, Ranthambore National Park or whatever it is, right?
Sure.
So that sort of communication starting to happen. We're trying to bring that in a little bit, as far as some of the low involvement categories that we operate in, like ceiling fans, etc. But
Mhm.
as we're getting into the EV domain, which is considerably more, considerably more higher involvement, certainly
Sure.
as purchase decisions are concerned. You're going to start to see brands in the EV domain, component suppliers in the EV domain, differentiating themselves in terms of the performance that they'll be able to provide those EVs.
Sure.
Right now, when you buy an EV, it's a black box. But think about when you buy an internal combustion engine, you can modify, you can put K&N filters, you can add,
Right.
you can add various accessories to mod your car for better performance or for looks like that. Now that's something that's going to happen in EVs as well in the near future. So one of the biggest complaints in EVs, especially two-wheelers in India right now, is the tepid performance that they have. But imagine a scenario where you could change your motor controller and it would be equivalent to like retuning your engine or whatever, whatever that entails. So
Sure.
imagine a scenario where people start reaching out. I mean, making purchase decisions like, okay, fine, I want to get this bike because it has a virtual forest controller, and a VF controller means better torque, better speed, and that's essentially the component that we deal in electric vehicles is the motor controller. This is where the decisions are. This is where the performance of the EV can be impacted in a particular way.
Right.
And it could be a scenario where you don't even need to change a part. The part
Sure.
itself, you just change the firmware to get the kind of performance that you want, like higher acceleration, higher torque at start. So those sort of things are going to start happening, and I see a scenario where that entire performance car customization thing that happened with internal combustion engines, maybe that's going to happen in EVs as well. And then that's the scenario where the component suppliers get considerably more recognition and
Sure.
and are a big part of the decision as well.
Interesting. But or doesn't that, two questions, right? Doesn't that makes your life difficult, right? In the sense that every brand is going to have different expectations, right? And I'm actually not breaking it down between, say, a white good industry or say EVs, right? I mean, general talking, right? Now, the flexibility that you offer, right, which is understood, right, because there's a certain business model that you're pursuing. But the fact of the matter is that when you give them that kind of a flexibility, you actually become a design backend, right, or a R&D backend for them, right, which does not necessarily means that. So it becomes a more boutique business of business which is essentially focused on doing a very limited task. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, right? And I'll address that entire concept of the VF controller that you kind of spoke of, right? But doesn't that makes you an exciting VC fundable model, right? And I say that because your aspirations as a founder and the cause that you're kind of wanting to sort of cater to and achieve, the kind of goals that you want to achieve, right, are going to require you certain amount of money, right? They require a very different kind of an advocacy. So I think question number one is, this particular challenge where the demands can be literally coming out of whims and fancies, right, and not necessarily very clearly demarked. And solutions that can be replicable across across many brands. I think that's number one. Number two, now when you want the conversation to pivot and the decision making of buying that asset into being dependent on say a certain brand value that you want to achieve, right? Don't you think it's going to be a difficult play, right? Because at the end of the day, the superior brand, and as a consumer, when I'm buying a brand, right, I'm buying a brand, of course, of what goes inside, but I'm also buying it basis, pretty much a lot of other bits and pieces around it, right? It's quality of service, quality of, say, for example, see the materials that have been used, right? My affiliation with that brand, my social nuances. There's so many other things, right, that are there. Do you think a brand will let you create that kind of space for yourself? It's going to be a difficult one, right? I know there are no clear answers to this. This is complex, right, in many ways. But I would love to understand how you see these two issues, uh, because one is a very contrarian thesis. You can continue to be a very tightly packed boutique business, right, and be extremely profitable, not necessarily when venture fundable, right? And the other one requires you to kind of go out and raise capital, right? So these are, very two divergent, complex issues, but need to be handled, right? What's your thought on this?
Okay, so I mean that's a complex question. I'll try and break it up into bits, and you can maybe just tell me if I've covered all of the points. To begin
Sure.
with, number one, about the niche area that we operate in.
Right.
Where I feel like we're reaching a point in terms of technology creation where you do require niche sort of specialized technology creation activity.
Sure.
It's no longer a scenario where everyone can do everything. What we do requires a specific type of capability in terms of motor control, in terms of firmware and software and hardware design, and of course testing and application knowledge. So this is not something which can be easily replicated, or is not easily, uh, it's not easily that this concentration of application knowledge is not easily achievable, and that's one of the challenges. And now some of our partners see a scenario where rather than try and replicate this in-house and always be a step behind someone else who started doing it a decade before you, you just start work with companies that specialize in this particular area. So
Well,
we
sure.
picked an
Omer,
yeah.
what I meant was that they will not go down to doing it themselves, right? What I'm saying is that they'll completely offload it onto you, where
Yeah.
your responsibility in the game is going to be definitely much larger. But because their chase is consumer delight, right? They will keep coming to you with very differentiated expectations, right? That makes your job difficult, right? I'm not taking it away from you that this is a specialized play, right? All I'm saying is, how do you handle that, right? When you pay 100% of their R&D is now kind of say it's on your shoulders, right? And the pressure of expectations will continue to increase, right? That's essentially what I meant with the first part of the
Well,
question.
us becoming indispensable to our customers is actually something we rather look forward to. but and also, yeah, you're right. It does come with various challenges, and some of them can, I do agree, can seem like whims and fancies as well, where features are requested, or some sort of deliverable is requested, and once it's done, it's like no longer part of the plan, and so these things do happen, but as long as we have a commercially synergistic relationship with our customers, and we're able to, provide them support that they can depend on, so they are actually in a position where they treat us as their offshore development center for this particular process. That's
Sure.
something that we actually look forward to, and that's a key part of the kind of relationships that we're trying to build. I mean, some of the customers who we deal with, very large white good manufacturers, we are, maybe in our third years of our development contracts with them, where we've already delivered around 18 or 19 different product types to them, and so these are the sort of relationships that we look forward to creating, and it's what we're able to do right now is that we're able to make sure that a larger portion of the value addition for appliances which are sold in India. I mean, this is demand which is aggregated in India. Uh, and so the value add for these particular applications is also created in India and stays within our borders, because people think that when you buy a whether it's a phone or any kind of consumer electronics, it's just purely the cost of materials, and that's about it. But it's oftentimes 25% of the cost to manufacture a product is actually technology license fees. I mean, you can go up to 25%, and that's a value add that up to this point has not a dollar which has stayed in our country, and so that's now something which is happening, and that's a huge benefit. And also it does extend further to the white good manufacturers own, like having some sort of access to this IP, and it again adds value to them. So this relationship is one that's synergistic and some one that's beneficial, I think, for both ends, as long as it's commercially viable. So that's how we view this.
Interesting. Like I said, no clear answers on that front. I think
Yeah.
it's a function of how this relationship evolves, right?
Yeah.
But I think a large part of this is also dependent on the how the market plays out. Now, Omar, I think an interesting shift and trend that we kind of see, is how, for example, I'm not talking about EVs. I mean, actually, we can possibly factor in EVs as well. It's just that in the B2C segment of EVs, we're seeing a smaller traction, right? I think this traction is bound to go up. But we're definitely seeing this in light goods, right? Now this is a segment which is going through a shift in terms of ownership, right? Uh, Generations early on, right, took pride in owning assets, right? What we are seeing in the current, generations, the newer, younger generations, right, is that they don't necessarily want to get tied down, and that's leading into a subscription economy of sorts, right? Now, which essentially means that this might there might be many. So, 2 or 3 things which are not necessarily very clear trends, right? The numbers are still I mean, we're still very, very small, right, on how this eventually trend is going to play out, right? But I think that shift is very, very clear. Is essentially that we might not necessarily need the kind of products that we're producing at the scale and pace that we're producing, right? So a lot of it is going to get re-churned in the process, which in a way is good for you and in a way it's bad for you, right? But this is a trend and a tendency which is here to stay. We're seeing it across automobiles as well, as a space, right? And personal mobility is what I'm essentially talking about, right? Be it two-wheelers, four-wheelers. I think four-wheelers is still different because of cost of financing is very, very high, but we're seeing this shift to sort of, right? How do you see that, right? How do you see that impacting your overall business model with your current partners, and I'm sure many more that you add as you go along? How do you see that?
The subscription business model, harder to do for white goods and certainly for mobility. There's no doubt about that. But that has, and this is something that we're already working on with some of our customers, is like building in these sort of subscription management functionality requirements into the application software that we create for our customers, where specifically in models where it's a pay per use kind of a scenario. You pay for the number of hours that your air conditioner is running or whatever it is. So this sort of functionality is something that we're able to build in. It does, it remains to be seen whether it becomes an absolutely organized sort of large scale model that works in our, certainly in the markets that we do work in. It's already happening in an unorganized way at a very, very large scale, in India, to cooling as a service and things like that. The one segment which has seen a good amount of traction for subscription is actually RO filters and water purification systems in homes. That's something that is particularly well suited to a subscription model, and that's seeing some traction. But other applications not so much. The one other aspect that's something that we're tracking and something that we believe is is going to be not a consequence, but it's going to play a part in the subscription model taking off, is the fact that one of the major demand drivers for certain type of appliances, whether it's kitchen appliances in particular, personal grooming and things like that, is premiumization. So, these are scenarios where people will replace these appliances for more premium or more feature-rich versions of these particular appliances. Things like TVs and all of that stuff. Premiumization plays a very, very big part. So that could be a good use case for a subscription scenario where you know that there's going to be a better TV, you know there's going to be a better blender that's going to come out in 2 years' time, etc. So why buy? You might as well rent or lease uh, with a fixed buyback, and then you get the newer version, or like think about like how in many markets you have uh, you know your the kind of plans that the mobile providers sell in other markets include phones which after a certain period of time are replaced with newer versions as well.
Right.
So that's something that could potentially happen in the appliance space. The other thing is that the ticket size for a lot of appliances is not really large enough to you know to justify that sort of model. So it remains to be seen how this plays out. Either way, as far as we're concerned, this business model requires certain feature creation, and that's something that we're already doing. Uh, and in terms of how it impacts demand, it'll be interesting to see, because it's not really a large enough cohort of the sort of demand that we're serving now for us to be able to make a significant stance on.
Omar, if I was, in your seat, I would have been cheering for this, right? Because, my belief is, and my thought process is that, a lot of hardware standardization is going to kick in, right? When an environment like this happens, right? Because, the churn is just going to be so high. And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely spot on when you say that, people are looking at premium, switching onto a premium product, right? I think that switch is just going to be so frequent that organizations will have to get into recycling, right? Which essentially means, for example, the components that you use, the body that you use, a lot of that will continue to, remain the same, right? Or at least functional for a much longer time, which essentially means that the upgrade will largely be, being driven from, say, controllers and a bunch of other things, right? And I think that could be a very, very interesting point to look out for. Omar, this has been an absolutely spectacular conversation. Thank you so much for doing this, right? And I particularly love the intensity of this discussion, right? Last question, cliched, but I think important. Is I think every founder has a journey, right? Good, bad, ugly. But I think it definitely has a bunch of lessons that he or she can kind of put out and for others to learn from, right? If you were to put one out, what would that be? I would particularly love to hear from you. I mean, you've chosen a path where you have to deal with a lot of bureaucracy, right, within organizations, right? I think a large part of when you're selling working with a B2B ecosystem, I think a large part of that ecosystem is in denial. Right? I think because of a variety of reasons, right? Without really getting deep into it, it requires you to be consistent. It requires you to be persistent, right? What's been your one learning that you would want to share with everybody out there who's solving for a B2B ecosystem? I'd love to bring this conversation to a close on that thought.
Okay, I mean, I would say that, especially dealing with B2B, it's that people are under the impression that large companies or very, very, I would say, very, very prevalent brands are actually drivers of innovation, and that's not the case. Right. Innovation has to be driven by smaller companies and has to be sold to bigger companies. Bigger companies make decisions. Their decisions lag change rather than preempt change. So if you think about a company that's getting into a brand new product line, it's because they realize that there's market demand for that new product line, and then they react, it goes up the scale, and sometimes that can be a very, very slow process. So a lot of people believe that what they see large customers doing is the only way forward, and anything else that's contrarian to that is not likely to work. But it's very, very important that you recognize trends, whether they're government trends or whether they're environment trends in our case, energy efficiency trends, whatever they are. You need to preempt those, not try and react to what a large B2B customer has already done. So I believe that's a key point. that has to be kept in mind, because even I'm absolutely guilty of doing that in certainly in the earlier parts of my career, where you only believe that change is coming if you see the large companies doing it. It's actually too
Right.
late by that point, because they're reacting to something that's going to hurt their balance sheet. They're not doing it for any other reason. So it's probably
Human inconsistencies, right? And I think large organizations are plagued by a lot of that, right? I think, like I said, right, denial, inertia, right?
absolutely inertia. That's what it is.
And I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a brilliant window for a startup, right? Or a newer bee to go out and get cracking on that particular piece. Omar, this has
Absolutely.
been an absolutely phenomenal, spectacular conversation. Many unanswered questions, in the sense that we couldn't cover them, through the course of the conversation, right? And I'm actually saving some of that for our next conversation. We
Absolutely.
should have hopefully soon, right? Because this segment and this sector is just so exciting, and we're just getting started with it, not just in India but globally, right? The good part is
Absolutely.
it's all happening at the same time, right? We're not kind of, typically we've been in a catch-up game, right? As a country,
Yeah.
it's not happening this time around, right? I think we are almost at the forefront across, entrepreneurs, right? They're working on creating these newer solutions, but also at a policy front, right? If not very clear, but I think there's this at least proactive approach to trying to solve for these challenges that are very, very visible, right? And I think that's amazing, spectacular, right? And a perfect, position for many more to start out, right?
I hope so. Yeah.
Behind the comfort of larger enterprises, right? And have been craving for some of that action, and possibly join newer brands like yourself, right? Who are solving this market. Umar, this has been an absolutely phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much. Like I said,
Thank
save
you,
some of it
Ashu.
for our next conversation. Looking to do it again. What's
Thank you. Look forward to it. Thank you so much.